Thank you, Roger. We're going to talk about New Zealand, what's happening there. First, 5 parts. Firstly, we'll give an overview of New Zealand and what the backcountry is like. About 2 decades ago, the way we started changing the way we manage human waste, and we'll talk a little of the drivers of that change, followed by some examples of those changes. We'll then go on to what issues those changes brought. New issues arose, and some issues continued. Finally, we'll talk about emerging solutions to some of those issues. So I'll pass over to Tom to introduce New Zealand and the backcountry.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Good to see you all. As John said, I'm going to cover the first section, which is just setting the context a little, and then John, being the environmental engineer and the rocket scientist, he can talk a little bit more about the technical side of things that we've faced over the last few years. New Zealand, if you haven't had the chance to visit us just yet, we're a relatively small country, 4 million people. I think you could fit most of us into the city of Denver. We do get a large number of international visitors, approximately 2 million per year. We have around 8 million hectares of protected lands, and they constitute around 1/3 of New Zealand's land area. Just a quick geographical lesson: North Island, South Island. That's about all you need to know. The Department of Conservation, who I work for, we're the government agency charged with managing New Zealand's protected lands. They include a wide range of statuses from World Heritage Areas, national parks, reserves, and through to stewardship land. Protected lands, they cover a wide range of environments. Mountainous areas, rivers, lakes, and coastline. It's been one of the more recent developments as quite strenuous efforts to protect and preserve some of our coastline. Over the years, an extensive range of backcountry facilities has been developed. They were developed for a variety of purposes. Various government agencies, clubs like the New Zealand Alpine Club, huts scattered around the New Zealand backcountry. Camping has always been popular for recreational users in New Zealand, but a lot of recreational use has been concentrated around these shelters. Toilet facilities where they were associated with these shelters tended to be pretty primitive, if they existed at all. And then today, we've had a significant increase in participation in outdoor recreation, particularly domestically during the 1980s, and more recently in the 1990s with a sharp increase in the number of international visitors. We've got quite an extensive asset base out there for a country of our size, and the department manages most of those assets, but as is noted up there, a number of clubs have their own shelters in the hills as well. Some of the more popular walks in New Zealand, they are now highly developed, and what I'm going to do now is just sort of take you through a group of different asset types, if you like, just to set the context there. The first ones I'm going to talk about are what we know as the Great Walks. If you go onto the Department of Conservation website, you'll find them. They're listed there. They're 9 of New Zealand's classic hikes. They include the likes of the Milford Track. They are subject to very high visitation. The likes of the Abel Tasman, which is down here bottom right, up to 61,000 bed nights per annum, and peak visitation per day of around 2,000. very high standard of facilities. It's both accommodation and toilets. Most often flush toilets, septic tanks and associated wastewater treatment systems. The next group of assets are the Alpine huts. These are mainly concentrated in the South Island, around Aoraki Mount Cook National Park, Western National Park and Mount Aspiring National Park. There's around 19 of them all up, and the Alpine Club have 8, I think, truly Alpine huts out of that lot. Got a range here, this one here on the left, that's the most popular one, Mueller Hut above Mount Cook Village, about 2,600 bed nights per year. And this one on the right here is an Alpine Club hut on the west coast of the South Island, Pioneer Hut. Around 1,000 bed nights a year up there, depending on the season. Toilet facilities associated with those huts are typically fly-out drums. And then the vast majority of New Zealand's backcountry hut network are simple huts and bivouacs like these ones here. They range from 2 bunks up to 10, relatively low level of use. You might get half a dozen visitors a year, 6 or so bed nights a year to a wee bivouac like that one there, and up to maybe 100 at a larger 6-bunk hut like that one. There's usually pit toilets associated with these huts, but in some cases like this bivvy here, there's no facilities at all. The department also manages an extensive network of campsites. They range in overall standard, and that includes toilet facilities as well. Flush toilets at some locations and through to pit toilets and others. Okay, so on to some of the issues that John referred to before, things that have encouraged us to change the way we manage human waste in the backcountry. And the first of those that we're going to touch on is cultural awareness. As of around about the 1980s, late 1980s, increasing respect for the beliefs of the indigenous people of New Zealand, the Māori people, or tangata whenua, people of the land. The principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, the treaty signed with the Māori people in 1840, are now enshrined in legislation. Indeed, the Act that governs the department that I work for, the Conservation Act, Section 4 requires us to consult with local tangata whenua with regard to any developments that we're planning to undertake. The other significant one for us is the Resource Management Act, enshrined in 1991, and that has specific provisions relating to the Treaty of Waitangi. More recently, there have been various settlements over historic grievances, and one of those settlements that you'll see come up in this presentation and again in Rodney Gerard's presentation tomorrow afternoon is the Ngāi Tahu Settlement Act in 1998, and that gave statutory recognition of the spiritual significance of Aoraki Mount Cook to the local tribe Ngāi Tahu. Aoraki Mount Cook being our highest peak at just under 4,000 metres. I'll hand over to John now, and he'll take you through some of the other issues and solutions.
About 2 decades ago, numbers in the backcountry started rising dramatically, and as Tom pointed out, some of the traditional huts, bed nights a year, lower use huts be 10 or less, not many at all. Maybe busy huts are a few hundred bed nights a year. Popular routes these days, maybe 10,000 bed nights a year, plus that number again, or 2 or 3 times that number of day visitors in more accessible places. So from traditional backcountry users, there were new user groups coming in, and they really required different kind of facilities. These open style pit toilets weren't popular and led to a lot of waste problems round about huts. So there was a change from pit toilets to flush toilets in many cases. perception that human waste is toxic. I guess these new user groups and the thought of, just looking into a pit toilet was that aversion to waste and wanting it to be taken away, out of sight. And also restrictive regulations, the regulators, or new legislation, where once legislation didn't get into the backcountry, if you like, backcountry users could build as they chose and manage waste as they chose. New regulations required, well, there were no exceptions. The challenge is that the regulations were more orientated to developed areas, and the backcountry requires different approaches in many cases. So there's been challenges there and continuing challenges. Third drivers of change with human waste management. Seen here, backcountry lake or tarns in the Alpine area. Backcountry tarns and river waterways have very low nutrient status. Human waste is, well, particularly urine, is high in nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Fecal waste is high in pathogens and carbonaceous material. And without control, they can these contaminants, nutrients damage the alpine lakes, tarns and so forth. Pathogens contaminated waterways with this increasing visitor numbers, and I guess introducing diseases from overseas that weren't prevalent in New Zealand at the time. And then aesthetic effects with higher user numbers and finding around huts, deposits, toilet paper and so forth. Also creating an impact was increased helicopter access to places. Previously, only a few people get in because they had to walk. Helicopters, large numbers of people could access quickly. Some of the examples of changes that evolved. One of the most dominant changes is the flying out of waste. Initially it started for alpine huts, changed from the dropping waste into crevasses or over bluffs, putting in fly-out vaults. And the attraction of that extended to subalpine areas and even to lowland areas that beside sensitive lakes, waterways, coastlines, concern about nutrient leakage into waters or pathogens getting into waterways. The early fly-out toilets were pretty rustic, and over the years been refined to some fairly sophisticated roll-out systems. This is one of the newer ones. Two sorts of fly-outs. One is the fly-out vault, this sort of system. The other is flying in vacuum pumps and pump-out cylinders, this sort of gear. This is a assist fly-out or a pump-out vault system in a lowland area. Many systems separate urine and fecal waste, discharge urine to ground. That approximately halves the fly-out frequency, and that's attractive. Another solution has been piping waste away from an alpine area. This is a picture of Mount Ruapehu in the North Island, as Tom pointed out. There's a village up here. It's a ski village. Mount Ruapehu has 3 ski fields. The largest of these is a ski field called Iwikau. It has 35 lodges with about capacity of about 30 people a lodge and about 6,000 to 7,000 day visitors. So ski time, there are a lot of people there, depended on septic tank systems. And in an alpine area, the discharges weren't being assimilated clearly. Mount Ruapehu is in a Tongariro National Park, and it's a dual World Heritage Park. Dual, for its environmental values and for its cultural values. So the discharge of waste to ground was offensive culturally, and the discharge of waste to ground where it wasn't being assimilated was giving concern about to human health. The nutrients were leaching into groundwater and changing the ecology of the streams. And there was concern that trying to treat on the mountain at cold temperatures would not be effective. The solution was to pipe the waste down the mountain and into a lower area and treat it to a high degree, and then subsurface irrigation. This solution has been used in a smaller scale at other subalpine huts, piping the waste a kilometre or two down the hillside to where there's better conditions to assimilate the waste. Another solution is, well, perhaps the most prevalent solution has been the use of ventilated vault toilets, transforming traditional pit toilets, not shown on the side. And what we've followed is the US Forest Service design manual for vault toilets, and that's really has, I think, transformed vault toilets, pit toilets, using that ventilation or that method of ventilating toilets. Compost toilets have had mixed success. They've been tried for a number of years from subalpine to lowland situations. The map on the left shows the mean ambient air temperature May to October, which is really the winter season. For compost toilets to work, a rule of thumb, my understanding I have is you need to be 10 degrees Celsius, that's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit or more. And the map illustrates that the only area of New Zealand that has that during the winter period as an average is up north, because the country spans from about 37 degrees south to about 46 degrees south, a big latitude change. I think reasons for the mixed success is the low ambient temperatures all year round. The summer ambient temperatures are not much higher, maybe 5 to 10 degrees higher. And the operational requirements that these places in backcountry don't get a lot of regular maintenance. Another change has been the development of secondary treatment systems to decrease the pollutant load and decrease the footprint of a land application system. A number of techniques have been used. This is called the hybrid system. It's a development by Australian firm Goff Plastics. Two-stage system, a vault system using water or low water use vault, and the discharge from that goes into an anaerobic upflow filter. Climatic conditions are right, the effluent can be quite low in BOD and other contaminants. Another example is, this is a foam filter with using gravity for loading, siphon dose loading onto the foam filter, and then siphon dose loading from the foam filter onto a surface irrigation system. And these systems, this was chosen in an area where subsurfaces, or the soil layer is thin. It's pretty tricky doing some subsurface land application because dense bush and so forth. Not an easy thing to construct without significant damage. With these changes, there have been new issues have arisen, and some of the old issues continue. Financial impact is substantial. Capital costs of toilets has risen dramatically. Pit toilets, putting those in, a sort of cost of $5,000. Modern fly-out toilets in the order of $40,000. And one particular system at a popular coastal site that receives peak daily visitor numbers up to 1,000. Cost of that was $300,000. So certainly for the department, it's been a dramatic impact on budgets. That's the capital budget. Also the operational budget, increasing number of flyouts, helicopter use, that's growing. There's also increasing compliance costs imposition by the regulators, need for training with some of the more sophisticated systems. Social issues continue. Backcountry users, particularly more popular walks, ecologically aware people. They are looking for sustainable solutions. It's low water use fitments, low carbon footprint, use of natural energy. That increases challenges. Staffing for the department or the people who run the huts, they have a high turnover of staff. Maintaining skill levels is a challenge. And the more sophisticated the systems, the higher the skills that are needed and the higher the risks if things start going wrong. This is an example, a Great Walks hut, about 10,000 overnight stayers in a season, plus day visitors. And hut near here, it was found, I think there was up to 200 to 300 day visitors a day, because people would spend the day, have long days walking in just for the experience, which has big effects on big loads on the system. So this is just an example of coping with flush toilets, many tanks. It's built on rock, so you couldn't build them into the ground, so it's visually intrusive.
One of the other issues, I started to lead you into it earlier, that we've been facing as a department, and also for the Alpine Club in places, is that greater awareness of cultural beliefs. And I touched on the Ngāi Tahu Settlement Act just as an example. Araki Mount Cook, it's the most sacred of ancestors to Ngāi Tahu, and as a part of the settlement there were two statutory agreements put in place, a deed of recognition and what's known as a tōpuni. For the area covered by those agreements, there are certain requirements of the department as manager of those areas. The first is consultation with Ngāi Tahu when planning for the area, so not just management planning but also operational planning. It's also required removal of all rubbish and human waste from those areas, and that affects 4 public huts and 1 private lodge. And we also need to provide public information about the significance of the area to Ngāi Tahu. So you can see that's had some influence on the way we've operated in the past.
Finally, in terms of issues that are continuing, fly-out toilets, intrusion of helicopters, the noise, high fossil fuel use. The use of helicopters in the backcountry is contentious in New Zealand. Mount Ruapehu, the mountain I showed earlier, they banned the use of helicopters for recreational purposes up there because people, I guess the dominant group, didn't want the noise. The nutrient effects on sensitive waters continues. Increasing pressure, particularly in the lower rainfall places, high resident times in tarns and so forth, the urine discharges are having impacts. And visually intrusive systems, as I pointed out that earlier high-use hut with the huts on rock, these above-ground septic tank systems. And this example shows these are Alpine area fly-out vault. This is a pump-out vault toilet, and the grey water at this particular site, a new system just been installed as a anaerobic upflow filter and sand filter, dosed with a dosing flout, and this will be all covered with soil and then planted with tussocks to hide it all, and all going well treat the effluent to high standard, because all drains into these lakes and want to maintain that. Emerging solutions. Something that Tom looked at a few years ago was in talking of these tapuni areas that are especially culturally sensitive. It's offensive to discharge any human waste to land. Currently, fecal waste is flowing out, but urine is discharged to the land, and a way of avoiding that discharge. So Tom secured an evaporator, a urine evaporator, and we did a desktop study looking at the physics, the climatic conditions, sun hours and so forth, and theoretically it looked like it could work. However, department was looking for funding and an able student or researcher to use the natural energy through various means. One is photogalvanic cells and solar-powered pumps, use of dosing siphons, and this here is a dosing flout. This particular system here was for one of the highest use areas, campsite, hut, Abel Tasman National Park, design peak of 2,000 visitors a day in summer, and right on the shores of a sensitive shoreline. It's a very popular canoeing area as well as a walking area, and with all the waste facilities right on the shoreline, we need to get the effluent away. So put in a solar-powered pump system and pumped it back over a ridge line into dripper system, which has been working particularly well. But it was quite an adventure. I think the power specialists were apprehensive about how it would work. There was a standby generator put in case there were not enough sun hours, but the sun has proved to be reliable.
One of the other emerging solutions, which I'll talk about perhaps in more detail, particularly the user acceptance of, is a carry-out system that was a local initiative, again in response to concerns not so much about waste generation around huts, but on some of our more popular climbing routes around Araki Mount Cook, and again that whole cultural sensitivity towards the Tōpuni area and the values and beliefs of tangata whenua. So introduced at Araki Mount Cook National Park, initially a very low level of uptake by users, but I'm pleased to say that's steadily improving, and they're now being sold more widely, and I'll talk about that in more detail tomorrow on behalf of Rodney with his research.
The intrusion of helicopters is a problem not just, of course, in New Zealand, and it is regulated in the United States, especially over national parks. Have you had, it's a two-part question. One is, are there certain parts of New Zealand that you said there was a group that effectively removed the opportunity to use helicopters to fly out waste? And that was probably not because of regulation, it was because of just public opinion?
The site that John was referring to, there aren't really any waste collection facilities in that area, so it was more a philosophical choice than anything to do with waste management, and more also about restricting public access, mechanised access into the backcountry in that particular
More the
site.
intrusion and disruption of both the soundscape and the view shed, if you will.
Correct.
In terms of having motorized.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. The other question I had, you've showed in a couple of slides, this is a question for the larger group that are using solar panels in places. When you look at the 10 degrees centigrade sort of median for getting a reasonable level of function for composting toilets, why not use solar energy to actually create that kind of environment and have decomposition occur?
There's been...
have you experimented?
I have to admit there's been a little bit of a reluctance to get too complicated or to introduce too much technology into the backcountry. One of the only solar toilet or composting toilet that I've had anything to do with, it was at a high use hut. It was at the hut that John showed photographs of before, Rootburn Falls hut on the Rootburn track there, 10,000 visitors a year, 1,100 metres elevation, cold temperatures, introduced a whole nother layer of complexity and technology with solar panels heating a thermosiphon to try and introduce heat, and it still didn't produce the demands that we needed out of the system. It's not to say it can't happen, it just hasn't been our experience to date. Mike?
Yeah, just a quick question. The urine evaporator, how much were you evaporating? Do you have any figures on that?
It never made it out of Mount Cook Village, unfortunately, and that's what John was alluding to. We would have really liked to have taken those studies further. John was commissioned in his role as an environmental engineer by myself to carry out this study, and this desktop study, and he canvassed a range of options for us, and that looked like being the most viable in terms of low capital cost, low operating cost, and low energy input. I purchased the unit, got it into the village, had it beside a weather station so we could look at correlating the climatic conditions against the rate of evaporation. And as a manager, managing the day-to-day side of things, I just didn't have the time and energy to put into the thing, and we were looking for funding and research assistance to take those trials further, and that just we haven't been able to achieve that to date, which is unfortunate because it does have some potential, I believe.
But your gut instinct is that this is the way to go?
I think it's got potential. Again, in New Zealand, the sort of number 8 fencing wire, keep it simple, stupid sort of concept, there's a little bit of cynicism and reluctance to introduce another layer of technology into the backcountry. So possibly some resistance from within the department to investing too much time and energy in that. But yeah, we'll continue to work on it.
A couple of questions right on that.
Sure.
Do you need the testing to happen in New Zealand, or could you put that on a boat, ship it up?
Yeah, not necessarily, I guess. Although maybe it would help if it was. You know, we've got some pretty unique climatic conditions. Lots of wind, high humidity, even in the high alpine areas. You know, I'd probably akin our alpine areas most closely to the coastal ranges of Canada, and even the western United States here. So, yeah, we can talk about that one if you like.
Was it self-built and self-designed, or was it purchased from a commercial provider?
No, it was actually an off-the-shelf item. But it was associated with Rotorloo, which is a proprietary composting toilet. So we didn't have to get it made up specially. The guy that sold it to us made some alterations to it for our purpose. I don't know if you were able to pick up in the back of it, there was this cardboard product which was designed to disperse the urine more widely and increase the surface area available for evaporation.
I have one more question,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So the dosing float, is that how you say?
Yeah, flout.
Okay, is that commercially available too?
Yes, it is. That's actually a US product. I haven't had anything to do with the flouts myself, but yeah, I'd be able to track down that product for you if you like.
You talked kind of on that same thing, that particular group of people that did not, there was cultural sensitivity to them discharging of any human excreta into the environment. So what did they do normally then?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of that question?
Well, so that group, there was a cultural group that was saying we don't want to have any discharge of excreta into the environment because of cultural sensitive reasons. So what, is this, these were local people living in the area?
It's the tribe that covers most of the South Island,
Okay.
Ngāi Tahu. And
So what do they normally do then? If, if it's not going back to the environment at some point, what are they doing with it?
you mean the tribe themselves, or
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're not visit. They don't usually visit that area. It's you know, this high alpine, so they don't usually traverse into it. It's the area that's visible to them from large parts of the South Island, which is why it's one of the reasons why it's got so much respect.
Oh, okay, so where they live, it's okay, but in this particular
Correct.
high environment?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I
correct.
was thinking there was people living in that environment, and I was wondering, well, then what are they doing there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure. John just wanted to add a little to that.
Just the cultural aspect. The tangata whenua has influenced the way waste is treated throughout the country, New Zealand, and it's culturally offensive to discharge waste to any waterway. So most wastewater treatment plants discharge to waterways. So it's been quite a continuing challenge to treat waste without discharging to waterways or to modify the waste culturally before it gets to waterways. And that applies wherever you are in New Zealand. But the particular area that Tom was talking to is a particular sacred ground, Alpine, so traditionally they were never there.
I've got one question. How you have on Repeu, the little village, how far is that waste piping that takes it down? How far is it piped and what elevation drop is that?
That's piped 6 kilometres from, I think it'd be about 1,500 metres to a bit less than 1,000 metres. Quite a steep grade. There were concerns about velocities, liquid velocities and blowouts at manholes and so forth. But it's all worked well so far without any drama.
Because theoretically that could happen up in a higher alpine environment at a hut and then down to a road system someplace if you could figure it all out.
Certainly that principle has been used in other high huts where it's been piped down, smaller diameter pipes down to bushline or near bushline, where the environment's better for ground assimilation of the effluent.
I was just curious with the urine evaporator, how do they address the smell issue? I would think something like that would just smell terrible.
I have to confess it's not something we've had to experience just yet because it hasn't even gotten off the ground. The initial sort of desktop type trials, we were just using plain water. And that raised a whole bunch of other issues too. What happens with the residuals, the urine salts and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's still a wee way to go on that one.